How good was The Last of Us Part 2? The Last of Us Part 2 released June of 2020 and is an action-adventure game set in post-apocalyptic US that's been taken over by infected zombies. The game takes place almost 5 years after the original, wherein Ellie and Joel travel across the country in order to cure the infection using Ellie's immunity. Obviously this doesn't happen, so they leave St. Mary's for Wyoming, wherein the second game begins. I won't lie, this game is incredibly controversial and confrontational, but the first thing I love about it is the story. The structure is very unique, and this is what I really enjoyed about it. Essentially what you have is a 20 to 25 hour linear story, which in itself is very, very long considering the high quality nature of this title. Most Naughty Dog games are about half that length. The game looks amazing, and it sounds amazing. And it's all highly curated with top-notch writing, voice work, and motion capture. It's also technically impressive and artistically mouth-watering if you find zombies, spores, and blood appealing. Pretty much every asset of this game is top-notch, and there is lots of variety to this game. From rain-soaked streets, to infested tunnels, to underground train stations covered in an eerie red hue, and bleak, cramped hospitals overrun by rot, zombies, and some of the most twisted-looking enemy design of any game. You'll find cascading sun rays painted over yellow farmlands, beautiful vistas of mountains and rivers, lush green jungles, and decrepit skyscrapers floating in foggy skies. With all of these locales, spanning multiple cities and characters, with boats and horses and towns ablaze in war, the game takes you on a massive, memorable journey that is a feast for the eyes and the ears. Like Uncharted, The Last of Us 2 can be slow, which doesn't always have to be a bad thing. It's a stylistic choice after all. The introduction is quite leisurely, as we have to establish the backstory, a new setting, controls, and several new characters, including a brief stint with Abby, the second playable character. This is a Naughty Dog game, so that means lots of forced walking and trotting, small talk, and squeezing your ass through cracks to set up zombie jump scares and such. Not to mention the snowball fight in town, which is cleverly disguised as the game's aiming and general movement tutorial. The idea of forced exposition in video games can be overbearing, but it's never for nothing in this title, as it sets up character development and allows you to soak in the world and be a part of the story. Like when you have to walk through the Wolf Stadium as Abby. It's pretty boring, but there's a lot to see, lots happening if you stop to look around, and these things allude to themes or character backstories that are not always explicitly told, like how the gym is the very first thing you see after leaving Abby's room. This is not a coincidence. These walking pieces are not exactly stimulating gameplay, and it puts the action on hold more often than not when you're confined to walking and looking, but it's world building, and usually much more subtle than that, and that's a big part of immersing yourself in any Naughty Dog game. And honestly, I would never replace the curation in Part 2 because it's not just an accessory. Like Hollywood cinema, everything they put into the framing of this game was meant to serve someone's story or allude to elusive themes like the moth symbolism, even if it's occasionally overbearing with the amount of flashbacks and forced downtime. Regardless, after a 2-hour simmering prologue, the game explodes in the snow lodge with a Joel scene and it never looks back. The Last of Us Part 2 from here on is violent, unforgiving, traumatic, and ungodly emotional. Always. How they handled Joel was very risky, but I think it's fitting for the story, not to mention the scene is quite mesmerizing. It is abrupt, but it follows in line with the tone of the entire series, the notion that the world is unforgiving no matter who it is. It's a little bit coincidental that he stumbles onto Abby in need of help at that exact moment, but that doesn't mean it's implausible. Regardless, people seem to forget that Joel was never the hero of The Last of Us. You may have liked him, but make no mistake, he was the villain. Just like Walter White was the villain in Breaking Bad, even though he was the main character, and at times very likable. Joel destroyed the only hope for a cure to the infection, which let's be clear here, this isn't the coronavirus where Joel has to wear a mask when he goes out to get an ice cream cone. This infection wiped out humanity, destroyed the world, burned society to the ground, and infested the world with zombies that want to eat your face off. So it's fair to say his actions weren't just selfish, they were dooming. The sheer fact that he murdered all the doctors in the room with Ellie is also just straight up evil, including Abby's dad. Joel gets to lie to Ellie, lead her back to Jackson, and live happily ever after. Joel got what was coming to him. Popular shows and games rarely have the balls to kill off lead characters, and if they do, it's for far less reason typically. Ned Stark was the main character of Game of Thrones and he died at the end of season 1, yet no one had an issue with it. You can say he got much more time in the limelight, and that's a fair criticism, but Joel deserved his death way more than Ned Stark no matter how you break it down. I really love what they did with the story, and I like how this game is more about Abby and Ellie, and I like how the game ultimately stays true to itself. No character is safe from what they have done. In my eyes, the entire Abby angle is very successful. We at first hate her, and when Ellie sets out to Seattle, the revenge thrill ride feels natural because we only have one side to the story. Only then, Abby's story is slowly unraveled. You play a mirror of the same 3 days in Washington as both characters, and you come to understand the entire situation from two different angles. It's fun to draw the parallels of where Abby and her friends are when you're playing as Ellie. Then you swap to Abby, and realize she was off on her own adventure with Lev and Yara, which places her here, here, and here. I really enjoyed the aspect of untangling these perspectives without it being too hard to track what was going on. Regardless, each becomes their own villain, and I'd argue that Abby is actually more of a victim in this game, even than Ellie, and she's not evil at all. Abby shows compassion and mercy in her darkest moments. She's a very well-rounded character coping with pain beyond heartbreak, and if you take the time to analyze the terrible things she does to Ellie and her friends, she's justified every single time. In fact, Ellie is too, given how long Joel lied to her and her fragmented knowledge of the killing. This is what makes them both amazing characters. You can truly root for either one at any time. It's quite a feat to portray a villain, only to make players realize there are actually no clear heroes or villains in this game, because everyone is dark. And as far as Abby goes, gameplay-wise her section is arguably even more fun than Ellie's, as you'll be treated to a lot of fun gameplay moments in varied enemy encounters and environments. And plus, Abby's performance is stellar, offering an entirely different vibe to her side of the story. And as you interact with her friends like Nora, you gain a different perspective, as most of them have died at this point, as you're essentially playing in the past. This is quite a cool way to twist up a story without it being totally confusing to follow. The transition, though, is slow, and players will have to repeat some of the same material they've already been doing, such as meeting characters, walking around, and starting a new upgrade tree, in addition to going to a gun range. But you can actually skip this, just walk back through the door like this. This lull period is, I guess, one of the less desirable points in The Last of Us Part 2, but every game has a release of tension. That is what fuels the next storyline, and this is it. And really, the hard reset actually isn't so bad, as we're coming off the Act 1 finale in the hotel, so all the exposition allows some space to reflect on the shock we just experienced. Jumping over to gameplay, the gameplay in Part 2 is sensational, and it's something that is even more fun on repeat playthroughs. You don't always get a great combat system in a game known for its storytelling, but this isn't the case here. The gameplay remains faithful to the original, but with a variety of enhancements and touch-ups that make it just so much more engaging and fun. The main reason the gameplay is great goes way beyond the detailed environments that offer a plethora of ways to approach fighting. It's also because there's an extreme amount of scarcity to the gameplay. In The Last of Us Part 2, you only have so much ammo and so many resources that you collect in drawers or bathrooms or dressers when you're scavenging about. The very few bullets in your guns means a lot, and switching between the weapons in your backpack takes some time. So every bullet you have feels precious, which makes the shooting feel desperately important. If you miss a few shots with your rifle, you'll wince in pain, giving you that feeling of attachment to the very few resources you have. And as such, you consider so many things because of this scarcity. Whether to use stealth over guns, whether to save your bombs for the odd chance you'll hit 2 or 3 enemies at the same time, or doing everything you can to save your shivs as Abby. And this goes for several other systems, like maximizing the efficiency of your crafting items like upgraded melee kits and healing management. You never want to waste resources when you can. And that thought is always in the back of your mind when you're fighting enemies in this game. This makes the gameplay overall feel very mentally engaging. More importantly, there's also a feeling of power fantasy, even with the somewhat standard arsenal of available weapons. This is because limited resources breeds excitement, as when you finally use those 8 bullets in your MP5 that you've been saving for just the right moment, it feels exciting, since you might not use that gun again for another 30 minutes. You might even forget how powerful the gun is. It's surprising in the best of ways and makes each weapon feel special, which is frankly an awesome and unexpected feature to these types of gameplay systems. The Last of Us Part 2 is also incredibly frantic by design. Important tools like bricks, bottles, bombs, mines, and Molotovs are equipped by hitting the D-pad, so you have to take your hand off one of the sticks to put them on your character. It's cumbersome, but in the best of ways, and I recall many moments where I was frantically running for my life, scared shitless and diving into cover so I can just get a split second I needed to switch my ammo type. Criticism could be leveled at the fumbly nature of it. A quick swap feature like the pouch from Elden Ring would have been perfect here, although without it, it adds a lot to the panic nature of the combat. Combat encounters are broken up into 2 different elements, humans and infected. Sometimes they're put together, but usually not. The human side is a little less fun, but it's very engaging because enemies prioritize flanking. You don't always get a third-person shooter where you're constantly surrounded, and the AI is pretty impressive in this game, especially how the enemies will call each other out by name, which was a nice touch. More so because they constantly surround you. On hard mode, you'll never feel safe sitting still. This promotes a shoot and move gameplay system. Enemies track your last known location and immediately flank you once you're detected, so it's best to clear the area and reposition. You do this by killing and moving. This leads to very satisfying emergent gameplay as you can circle back around enemies after being detected and re-enter stealth. Not by some on-screen system, but organically through manipulating the AI, which is a far cry from blatant artificiality inside many games. What really makes the gameplay great though is that the mechanics are to die for in this game. Just the way Ellie and Abby move feels visceral and heavy, and all the animations are just so satisfying. The screen thuds and shakes when you sprint. Rifles thunder when you fire them. Baseball bats, axes, and wrenches smash into faces, spraying blood all over the place while caving in the skulls of your enemies. Stealth takedowns are incredibly fluid as well, with realistic interactions with the environment being a star feature, like slamming someone's face into a wall if you're close enough to it. This is very hard to program. In addition, the new system of dodging is way more interactive, which plays more or less like a fighting game now. You can crouch, crawl, jump, dive, swim, jump into water, or off buildings for insta-kills and more. There's also a tremendous amount of canceling options for reloading, melee combat, and basic maneuvering. The game rarely, if ever, locks you into animations, allowing you to adjust to things on the fly and be flexible with your options, even if you make a mistake. Point being, The Last of Us Part 2 is surprisingly light on its feet, and there are so many options for you. One of the more substantial changes to combat is the expanded area design. The environments have been opened up a lot, in scale, complexity, and variety. The fighting happens in intricately designed areas, both close quarters and expansive outdoor areas where you can truly approach the encounters in any way you choose. There are so many nooks and crannies, so many windows you can jump through, so many cracks you can squeeze through, all serving the shoot and run gameplay I mentioned before. This, without question, is the best part about The Last of Us Part 2, the fact that the combat can play out in 1,000 different ways, and it's up to you how much stealth or aggression you want to use. The scenarios you're dropped into are stunning because they also have a lot of context to the story. This is where linear gameplay sections often trump anything open world games can provide, like bleak tunnels, large villas with so many options to move around, or the quarantine area of a hospital, which is absolutely terrifying. Or a multi-layered mall wherein Ellie has to steal a boat from her enemies. The game knows exactly where you start, which is why everything feels so intricate and detailed. It's here you can implement so many tactics, such as swimming underneath the patrol routes of enemies and coming up behind them. It's gorgeous and a ton of fun. Either way, the gameplay is always scrappy, chaotic, and violent, with the cramped controls and stiff turning radius of the characters. Panic sets in fast when you're cornered with no way out. I wish there was a little bit more blended gameplay between the scavenging and combat. There could have been some smartly placed ambushes while you think you're safely looting a bathroom, for example. So somewhat of a missed opportunity here, but overall The Last of Us Part 2 has the most intense, impactful, and desperate gameplay I've ever experienced. And playing through this game again was an absolute joy. The Last of Us Part 2 is a terrific video game with one of the most amazing stories you'll ever find. It's raw and it's heavy, just like the characters, the setting, and the gameplay. The sound design is equally amazing. Strap on a headset, turn it up, crank up the difficulty, and turn off the lights. The Last of Us Part 2 will scare you. You will shit your pants, and you will be immersed. No, it's not just the sound of clickers cackling their jaws, it's the beautiful, eerie silence as well and the minimal use of music throughout your play. The entire game is one incredibly engaging, downcast adventure set very appropriately in Seattle where the rain, fog, and coldness blanket the chaos and sadness perfectly. This is no cheap fairy tale, this is no safe story. The Last of Us Part 2 is an incredibly original, risky game with deeply rooted ideals and themes and characters. If you're open to the possibilities, the game will haunt you, amaze you, and even challenge your own way of thinking. Either way, it's possible that you may never forget it. So, how good was The Last of Us Part 2? Phenomenal.